What's up, guys? Welcome back. I'm going to separate this section for this video to be a rabbit hole video, so I'm going to list it on YouTube specifically for stuff that I deep dive into. So right away I'm going to start off with one thing that I found was a declassified document I stumbled upon from watching YouTube videos, other channels that directed me to this. This is all declassified off of the main website for the CIA, talking about the gateway process. I talked to a couple of friends. What I read, it's pretty much a 29 page article that they had for experimentations back in, it says right here, June 1983. So I'm gonna go back before I get to this. I want to show you guys a YouTube video. See if I can pull it up. So this is Itzhak Bentov, 1978. He went on this show with Hubert Jessup, talking about basically what he found through his research and talking about metaphysics, spirituality, other stuff that we were talking about the previous video about vibrations. And I just wanted to show you guys this video. So hopefully it goes through. Hold on.
Existences.
That is, the soul is the repository of information that we gather during a lifetime. Well, I'll tell you, maybe we should draw another diagram.
So before he goes and draws the diagram, previously they're talking about how the soul is in our vessel for our body, and he was writing books on this in 1978. Basically, even before the experiments that they had for the CIA for the gateway process, but he did write a book. They did, on the declassified document for the CIA, did quote his book at the very end of the page, but I just want to show you the diagram first before I get into anything else.
Physical bodies are here, another physical body, another physical body, and this is Joe, and this is Jim, and this is Sarah, etc.
So the bottom line, he's talking about the separation of different people on this spectral plane for vibrations, and he'll get more into it right now.
Now, clearly, on the this is the physical level, yeah? Now, on this physical level, we're all separate. You sit there, and I sit here, and we're all separate. Now, let's draw another level. This level is slightly higher, and let's call this the level of the soul, yeah? Well, there will be some mingling here. Let's draw this person as extending to practically infinity this way. Now look what happens. At the physical level, we're separate, and there's this much distance between us. Let's say that on the soul level, this person extends this much, and the other person gets slightly mixed in with him. That is, the souls are, in a way, in touch with each other. Okay, they overlap, these two lines. Now let's go now to a higher level, and let's call this, say, the level of the higher self, which is kind of a boss of that soul. There, what we find is that this fellow's higher self extends this much, and the other fellow's extends this much. There is more overlap between them. Right. On the very highest level, which is the high spiritual level, we are basically overlapping completely.
So explaining this graph from what I did for research already, just from the bottom, we vibrate at different frequencies. All of us are antennas. Everybody has different energies within themselves that they radiate. It's their aura, right? Through meditation, you can raise these frequencies. The last video, I was talking about raising frequencies. Everything is all connected. So basically, when you went to the second level, you start to attract, or you'll start to find other people that think the same way or feel the same way. That opens up to the possibility of everybody has a shared omnipresent frequency within these levels, which is an interesting thing to think about. You know, talk about everybody has their own personality and different egos and different backgrounds, but when you start to raise your frequency through, you know, spiritual practices, meditation, all this stuff will start to blend together. you'll start to connect the dots pretty much. So he's explaining in the graph basically the higher you go, the more connected you are to different souls.
Everybody is overlapping everybody else. In other words, everything and everyone is everywhere. In other words, we've become omnipresent. This is a state of highly spiritual perfected beings, or gods you may call them. Okay?
Okay, and so that we exist on all of those simultaneously.
On all of those simultaneously,
So then,
but we're not aware of them.
In your view, then, if when we see each other as separate entities, that's only seen on one plane of reality.
Correct. And so whether we like it or not, we're all evolving towards godhood. But you know, it takes eons, so don't hold your breath.
Is that the purpose of evolution?
Naturally. Because at that point, you start understanding how the system works. And one of the good things about this system is that the system wants to teach you about itself.
Mm-hmm. What does
It's
it
a
want
good
to teach
system.
you? Yeah?
Yeah.
What does it want to teach you?
Well, if you are omnipresent and you're all-knowing, that is the state which the system wants you to be in.
Mm-hmm.
So 1978, hearing this, it's going to conflict with a lot of different backgrounds, but now I think in modern day society, more spiritual practices are happening. You can kind of relate to this a little bit more, and I know a lot more people are becoming spiritually awakened and more in tune with, God and their faith and religion, and so what happened after this interview, he was on his way. He was on a plane heading towards, I think one story said it was to LA, the other one was to Japan. He ended up, the plane crashed and he passed away. So he had his books that were out during the time people were reading up on what he was trying to teach people, but sadly he passed away during a plane crash. So fast forward, I go to the other thing. So fast forward, this is pretty much out of his book that he wrote, but I'll start at the very beginning. So after doing research, I stumbled upon this, which was called the Gateway Process, which was an experiment done by the CIA around 1983, where they had people that were volunteers to work on a military study for higher frequency consciousness, awareness, and not quite spirituality, but they found techniques through using sine waves and sound, using headphones, putting themselves into a relaxed state to see if they can break through. Pretty much like a lot of people will spend a long time to try and meditate for years, and even if they are able to get to a higher vibration, it takes a long time, it takes a lot of practice to be able to break through. CIA had a project pretty much saying that they had sound engineers at the time being able to mimic and trigger your brain waves to put yourself into that state. It's a very lengthy thing. It's all on the internet. You can pull it up. It's called the Gateway Process. But I spent a good 2.5 hours reading through all this, and the one thing that stood out to me was, I'll keep going. They thought in forms of this is how it would be, so a type of hypnosis, right? They broke down the biological point of the left and right hemisphere of the brain and how it corresponds to our surroundings, our sound, and they had diagrams, which these were pretty much in Mr. Bentov's book, where they took from his book and applied it to an actual experiment. Breaks down motor and sensory cortex of the brain. Keep going down further. Talked about biofeedback. So they proposed the part of this, what I want to say is hemisync, which was tapes. They made audio tapes, and they're actually available on YouTube. Spotify actually has them too. They have the Gateway Hemi-Sync tapes. That's what they're called. And I think there's 12 tapes. I went through the first one for about 20-30 minutes, and I sat in meditation, my eyes closed, had the headphones on. And to describe what it is, basically it's white noise. I don't know if you guys know what white noise is. It's, you know, TV static, low level in the frequency of your headphones. So they mask it with sound of waves on the audio file. So you're sitting there listening, and you're supposed to close your eyes, and it's a sensory deprivation. You want to try and trigger. They go through these steps, these 12 steps, and there's an actual scientist, say the scientist guy that created the Hemi-Sync. He would ever so often, you know, a couple minutes come into the audio of the track that you're listening to and say that practice this count. You know, you have to try to ground yourself through the process, and within about 45 minutes you can actually feel something change within yourself, your consciousness. Basically, the process of Hemi-Sync, what it does is they found out a pattern within our body for our consciousness is like a flow, and they're able to sync it up for the left and right hemisphere of the brain. So when that does happen, it triggers a mind-altering state. So people through years of meditation practices, they are able to do that naturally, depending on their setting, how long they've been meditating for, what they meditate on. You know, all that takes years. The CIA found a way to do an expedited form of conscious breakthrough, pretty much. So they talked about different scientists that were involved. They mentioned different videos that I looked up also for books that we're talking about, but I'll get a little bit farther down real quick. So in the terms, it's a pretty lengthy paper to go through, and most of the actual narrative of pretty much the whole paper itself is in kind of like you can tell like a CIA agent is typing this out for a director to read, and so it's a little bit harder to get through. You have to I had to reread a couple of sections to go through it to actually fully understand what they were trying to explain. So they mentioned Bentov's biomedical model, which they took from his book, shows the resonance of a considerable importance since it is directly transmitted to and impacts upon the brain. So they were talking about the functions and how it reacts to different frequencies. This section of the paper, this is where it kind of stood out. They pretty much mentioned that the consciousness itself is producing a hologram, where if you think about a hologram, I know if you start digging deeper into the process of everything, you know, you hear about the Matrix and stuff like that, you know, from back in the day. They're talking about the Matrix, how everything's a simulation. The CIA on paper, according to this declassified document, through the military exercise, was confirmed. So section 12, it says holograms. So I'll read it right here. Energy creates, stores, and retrieves meanings in the universe by projecting and expanding at certain frequencies in a three-dimensional mode that creates a living pattern called a hologram. The concept of the hologram can be most easily understood by using the example cited by Bentov, which, you know, like they started quoting most of the stuff, in which he asked the reader to visualize a bowl of water into which 3 pebbles are dropped. As the ripples created by the simultaneous energy of the 3 pebbles radiate outward towards the rim of the bowl, Bentov further asked the reader to visualize that the surface of the water is suddenly flash frozen so that the ripple pattern is preserved instantly. The ice is removed, leaving the 3 pebbles still laying at the bottom of the bowl. Then the ice is exposed to a powerful coherent source of light, such as a laser. The result will be a 3-dimensional model or representation of the position of the 3 pebbles suspended in midair. Holograms are capable of encoding so much detail that, for example, it is possible to take a holographic projection of a glass of a glass of swamp water and view it under the magnification to see small organisms not visible to the naked eye when the glass of water itself is examined. So I took that and tried to digest that, what they were trying to say, basically, that the human brain and consciousness is so complex, and we have sensories where our five senses can pick up on our plane to basically say, we know, like, if we touch something, it's made out of all atoms, it's solid matter, but they're still moving at a speed that we can't perceive with our eye. So talking about this blew my mind reading the paper, basically explaining how our waking consciousness, our subconscious, is creating and reflecting and creating everything else around us. So it's pretty deep, and it's kind of complicated to really think about it, but it's not. They were using the experiment for a laser to shoot beams, and the frequencies would change and be recorded. And they go on, and the consciousness matrix, section 14. The universe is composed of interacting energy fields, some at rest, some in motion. So if you think in terms of how atoms react, and they're all around us, it is in and of itself one gigantic hologram of unbelievable complexity. According to the theories of Carl Pribram, a neuroscientist at Stanford University, and David Bohm, I actually looked this up on YouTube too, they're physicists at University of London. The human mind is also a hologram which attunes itself to the universal hologram by the medium of energy exchange, therefore deducing meaning and achieving the state which we all call consciousness. So I had to sit there for a second and really think what that meant. So you talk in terms of people that do practice meditation, they do practice spiritual awareness. You become consciousness of yourself. You're aware of your own consciousness if you're able to meditate. And I read a couple of books saying that there's an observer, and the observer is inside you, observing quietly as you go about your day. You speak, you interact, you go to work. All that exists. And there's things outside of our perception, different realities and dimensions that we can't see, but it's happening all around us. It's through energy. It goes on in breaking down the brain in phase. It's very detailed. I would want you guys to try to see if you can read the document for yourself, because it took me about 2.5 hours to read. At the end result, they did explain that they were able to actually break through using these procedures. They were kind of audio conditioning these people to trigger meditation, and this is where the crazy part is. So they were aware of the matrix itself existing. They knew about other entities also being in that same dimension. My one reference that I did pick up, which it's been popping up more and more on the news now, has been remote viewing. Basically, if you guys don't know what remote viewing is, they did a procedure using these conditions for the CIA military exercises, talking about how they would have someone across, the state, let's say that they're the East Coast, and they were put through this, gateway process to be able to be under kind of like a meditative trance, and they were sent instructions basically to try to picture themselves projecting across the state at another lab on the West Coast. And I think through the paperwork they said that 8 out of the 10 people that were practicing through this experiment were able to read, I think, 5 out of the 6 cue cards that they had across the country. So this is being developed in 1983. I can imagine, like right now, so many years later, that they probably are able to do this, where different sources I've seen on Twitter and X and stuff basically talking about they've had people be able to remote view certain locations. They've given them specific geographical coordinates, and they would be able to go from their consciousness to remote view. And one of the things that popped up, I don't know if it's true or not, I have to go down another rabbit hole, was they were able to find the Tomb of Gilgamesh remote viewing. I think it was at the time Iraq. Basically they were able to remote view, found the Tomb of Gilgamesh, whatever artifacts that they had inside, they sent the military to, pretty much police and rope off the area, and whatever happened was top secret after that. But I had firm believer that all this stemmed from this project in 1983. So once they started breaking down the medical stuff, the scientific stuff, everything started to tie in together with what they were trying to do for the process of the conditioning for the gateway process. They were able to, according to the scientist, time travel from future and past, present. They were able to remote view, astral project. They found other people, I want to say entities, within this force field that they were able to encounter and communicate with them. So the depth of what they established for this experiment was pretty crazy. One thing that stood out to me was there is page in my head. 25 was missing completely from the archive when you get it off of the official government CIA declassified. 25 is missing. I don't know why, and through digging through Reddit I was actually able to find it, which kind of pieced together the last part of the puzzle. But yeah, they talk about special status, out-of-body experience. This is all recorded and documented. So 23, section 23, this is where it gets pretty crazy. They talk about pretty much there's two sides to everything. There's a dualistic nature. There's a black hole, white hole. There's matter. There's antimatter. There's different forms of dimensions that exist within ours. We can only perceive 3D, 4D, right? 5D we can't really see. Section 23 pretty much talks about the absolute in perspective. Basically the complex of the hologram, which is created by the intersection of energy patterns generated by the totality of all dimensions of the universe, time, space included. We have noted that our minds constitute energy fields which interact to various aspects of this hologram to deduce information which is ultimately processed through the left hemisphere of our brain to reduce it to a form that we can employ, for a process we call thinking. So in terms of whatever that we perceive with our senses through even state of meditation, we have to have our brains process to make sense of it. I know a lot of people, where my water at? Sorry guys, 1 second. So a lot of people that I've talked to ever since my younger 20s, they've had like life-changing experiences with like different types of hallucinogenics. They've people have been wanting to try DMT, all that stuff, where they were able to see different things. They would come out of their relaxed trip and be a completely changed person. They're using case studies now for even psilocybin for mushrooms to change your brain patterns to help with depression. I think once people start to understand that what we see for our perception and our senses through our dimension, there's a lot more that we don't understand. The CIA obviously was doing these experiments to try to get something documented. It even went to the point of where I have a reference for like Stranger Things with the character 11, where she was actually in a sensory deprivation pool, right? But she was able to activate her telepathic senses. All that's real. All that's real. Think about that for a second. That they were able to engineer a process to activate hypersensitive people to have some type of form of telepathy astral projection, basically be able to go through dimensions past our physical body and retain information, be able to, tell a story, see a place that we haven't been to. And a lot of people will probably contest it, saying that, oh no, it's fake, it's not real. I mean, it's up to your opinion. I've done enough research just for this paper alone that there's a lot more connections to things. Excuse me. Another thing a couple of weeks back that popped up on one of my algorithms for X, for Twitter, was basically saying that scientists are saying now that time isn't a singular line. It folds onto itself, and whatever that we do in the present moment changes the past, and the future can't be changed because it hasn't happened yet. But if time folds onto itself in the present moment, the past has changed. So I don't know if that went in terms of the Mandela effect. The Mandela effect, if you have a core memory of something, remembering, like Fruit of the Loom or Bernstein Bears books, the movie Shazam. That was a big Mandela effect. And things have been altered, things have been changed, and you start to have like a deja vu moment, like, oh no, I remember it being this way. And I think when time folds within itself with our perception of reality in the present moment, things get altered. So they had a graph, this popped up. This is where I was kind of connecting the dots a little bit. I was watching an episode of Ancient Aliens where they're talking about the cosmic egg. This is a big thing that pops up every time you do any type of research in this stuff. The cosmic egg basically is what Bentov was trying to explain, was the parallel between the two of us and time folding within itself. The black hole, obviously, we haven't been able to perceive through a black hole, and the white hole is the complete. The way that they're trying to put it, it's kind of like an infinity mirror, where it's a reflection. So we'll go through the process of everything, and everything is all with our senses through a hologram. So a point where flow of time, space turns towards opposite pole of the void. So in terms of what the cosmic egg was, they said instead of time being a linear line, it folds within itself like a downward spiral. So I think that also comes in terms with sacred geometry. And if you've ever looked up anything for sacred geometry, there's a lot of patterns within our universe, mathematical, plant life, biology, even down to the single microscopic organism. There's a pattern, the geometrical pattern, the cosmic, basically there's a repeating pattern of everything in the universe. They take shapes of different forms. I was talking about my last video about sematics and how wavelengths have a specific visual representation. If you tune it to a right frequency, that's all tied together. It's deep, very, very deep. There's a lot of stuff that I think it opened my eyes more to, having the fact that the CIA actually was doing this for an experiment. So the advanced techniques, once you start, if you do decide to listen to the tapes online, they'll go from ranges of being aware of your self-consciousness to be able to problem solve, to manifest, to even change. Like what I was saying, the later steps was to astral project, to travel back in time. And the last step, I think they only had one participant that actually finished all 12 tapes and were able to hit that point of conscious spiritual awareness. So every section of the paper talking about problem solving, patterning. Energy bar tool was an interesting thing. I think it's the third or fourth tape they start to pretty much talk about how you can, once you get into the state of meditation, able to consolidate your energy force into a specific thing. This one they're saying it's a energy bar tool. nicknamed like magic wand for the occults and stuff, spectre staff, maces. But they noticed the correlation between the two in history with other cultures and what that actually meant. So the energy bar tool technique involves envisaging, sorry I can't talk, a small, intensely pulsating dot of light which a participant charges in his imagination with enormous energy until it's virtually pulsating. The participant then extrudes the dot onto a shape of a sparkling, vibrating cylinder of energy, which he then uses to channel force from the universe to selected parts of his body for purpose of healing and revitalization. Think about that for a second. So, older tribal communities and cultures, they've always had some type of medicine, doctor, healer, shaman, whatever you want to call them. They had tapped into, from what my opinion would be, is the CIA document 1983 was already explaining how us as human beings already tapped into all of this centuries ago. So when you think about the energy bar tool, if someone's hypersensitive enough to be able to have like a deep practice on tapping this type of ancient energy for a second, you think about people that were able to heal with touch, with talismans, with staves, you know, back in the day. They would be able to cure sickness, you know. If this was actually practiced, then I'm looking at how just the CIA did it. It's probably took years of practice. You needed to probably already be born with some type of hypersensitivity to even access this type of powers. But like they talk about how the subconscious of the human brain itself, like we're only using 10% of our brain. If people been that superhuman powers, I don't remember what that show was called, but they would, you know, highlight these people that lived in our modern day and they just had extraordinary talent. People that were able to fold a frying pan for superhuman strength, people that would be able to climb, you know, with no rope, no nothing. Like it's that all that stuff exists. It's very, very small percentage in the world that these people are gifted with these talents. But you think about this for a second, if they're able to even tap into something like this, where concentrating their energy enough to be able to heal parts of the body. It's a crazy idea to think about that. Part E, they were talking about remote viewing. Energy bar tools used to have a portal for initiating follow-up technique called remote viewing. So they're concentrating the force into a dot and then stretching the dot into a cylinder, right? And able to apply that cylinder, that concentrated energy during the time of meditation to remote view. They were conditioning to whirling vortex, which he sends his imagination in search of new and illuminating sights. The apparent purpose of the symbolism involved in the vortex seems to be a cue to the subconscious and convey it to instructions as to what the participant wishes to do, but in terms of nonverbal symbols which the right hemisphere of the mind is capable of understanding. So they've got to this trip out and think about this for a second. Like if they were able to go this far with hemisync and being able to have participants tap into something like this, and you're talking about doing it faster than some of the other cultures, you know, the Hindu cultures, anybody that ever practiced any type of meditation took hundreds of years for them to achieve this. They were able to do it with audio frequencies to trigger all of this, and to have access to this information in 1983, crazy. Living body map was funny because I was just listening to a podcast today talking about, they had I forget, his name was Fred, I gotta look it up, but he was a healer where he was able to focus his energy on his hands and were able to heal people. So I think it branches off of being able to concentrate so much energy and tap into someone's frequency field with just touch. But they were able to heal specific areas of the or systems of the human body with this energy. Imagine for a second to think that like you were able to concentrate so much energy that you were able to heal through touch. Section G, traveled into the past. They were able to have specific instructions, very symbolic at the time, being visualized as a huge wheel in the universe with various spokes for each to give access to different parts of the participant's past. The later that you get into the actual process of the gateway process, it seemed to be a little bit harder to try and achieve. Remote view the future, out of body movement. So section 31, they were talking about astral projecting. This, I've actually heard this does exist too. People have been blessed to be able to astral project even without, the military exercise for remote viewing. And they're able to move around. And through meditation, if you, practice and raise your frequency enough, I think you are able to attain to do this. And it takes practice. Obviously it's kind of like the in between REM state of consciousness and sleeping, where you're able to move and float around. The role of REM sleep. Go into different frequencies for this. So this is where it's page 24, and then it gets cut off. So I'm going to read this whole section because this is like really important. The classic description of the universal hologram is to be found in a Hindu sutra, which says, "In the heaven of Indra, there is said to be a network of pearls, so arranged that if you look at one, you see all the others reflected in it." So I'll just read it. This section, I found page 25, so I'm gonna add it to this once I finish at the bottom part, because I feel page 25 was cut off because they start to talk more about Western Christianity, and I don't know if at that time they felt that it would conflict. Honestly, it doesn't conflict. Page 25 I'm happy that I found it, because it pretty much concludes what he was trying to write here, because it was weird because literally it would cut off at the bottom and then it would just go to a different section, which I was kind of like, that's really weird why they cut it out, even though it was a declassified document. So I'll just read it. I have cited this quotation because it shows that the concept of the universe, which at least some physicists are now coming to accept, is identical in its essential aspect with the one known to the learned elite in selected civilizations and cultures of high attainment in the ancient world. So what do you think he talks about right now? If the CIA and the historical books going way back to centuries about different people that had special abilities to go to the core concept of higher vibration frequencies of becoming omnipresent. Think about that for a second. The concept of the cosmic egg, for example, is well known to scholars familiar with the ancient writings of the Eastern religions, or the theories presented in this paper at variance with the essential tenets of the Judeo-Christian stream of thought. The concept of visible reality, i.e. the created world, as being a emanation of the omnipotent and omnipresent divinity who is completely unknowable in this primary state of being. The absolute, I'll get back to that. The absolute is very important. The absolute at rest in infinity is a concept straight out of the Hebrew mystical philosophy. Even the Christian concept of the Trinity shines through the description of the absolute as presented in this paper. This paper pretty much confirming the fact that all of the religions are specific and tied together. The description of the energy totally at rest, the infinity fits the Christian metaphysical concept of the Father, while the infinite self-conscious resident in that energy providing the motive force of will to bring a portion of that energy into motion to create reality corresponds with the sun. This is so because in order to attain self-consciousness, the consciousness of the Absolute must project a hologram of itself and then perceive it. That hologram is a mirror image of the Absolute in infinity, still exists outside of time and space, but is one step removed from the Absolute and is actual agent of all creation, all reality. And the internal thought or concept of self which results from this self-conscious serves the, and then it got cut off. So that last couple of sentences are pretty deep. So me sitting there after an hour and a half, 2 hours of reading it, I was just like, what happened to the page 25? So let me pull up page 25. I actually found it off of Reddit. I don't know how they got it. Maybe they scanned it. Where is it? This is page 25. Try to expand it a little bit. I don't know if I can zoom in. Let's see if I can zoom. So 24, I'll go back a couple of sentences and I'll go to page 25. That hologram is a mirror image of the Absolute. Sorry. Sorry. That hologram is a mirror image of the Absolute in infinity, still exists outside time and space, but this one step removed from the Absolute and the actual agent of all creation, all reality. And the internal thought or concept of self which results from this self-consciousness serves the Absolute, this is page 25, Absolute as the model around which the evolution of time and space resolves to ultimately attain a reflection of and union with Him. That thought model, which perfectly reflects the essence or spirit of the Absolute, fits the Christian metaphysical description of the Holy Spirit. Finally, our description of the universal hologram, the torus of creation and the evolution, is neither new nor original. It is used as a figure of the universe of creation developing in evolution, is found in various styles, representations in virtual every religious system of antiquity. Whether the Eastern or Western derivation, whether it's the stylized labyrinth once popular in the Hellenic world, the spiralized version of the Hebrew tree of life, or the Hindu counterpart, or the Chinese spiral through the fourfold powers, the ultimate meaning is the same. Mystics, the world over, it seems, have perceived the universal hologram in the same spiral form and have incorporated that intuitive knowledge in their religious writings from antiquity to the present. Think about that for a second. So I sat there in silence for about 10-15 minutes. They were able to find that understanding. They were able to find that understanding through this process work and the research that they've done, which pretty much says everything is all tied in together. Consciousness itself within ourselves is a reflection of the Absolute, which is God, which is a higher spirit. It's worded differently in different cultures, It's different deities have different names. I've had, you know, mythological classes and stuff that I've taken for philosophy, reading all the books that I could, and it all goes back to the same thing. It's one source. So this is why I think page 25 was kind of, you know, taken out at the time of declassified parts for the websites, because I mean, yes, it's gonna raise a lot of questions. You know, honestly, I don't. My opinion. This is just my opinion on the video. I don't think anybody's wrong. I don't think anybody's wrong. If you follow your own religion, your religious background, your spirituality, nobody is wrong. We're all connected to the source. We're all trying to connect to the source. So, you know, in terms of Christianity, Jesus Christ, you know, walked throughout our lives, changing people through miracles. And I was just talking, you know, to my girlfriend about this today, and I was thinking to myself, like, you know, people want to be closer to spirituality, and, you know, they name Jesus Christ as they want to follow in his footsteps of being able to do God's work. All actuality, if you really think about it, like, even if whatever religious background doesn't have to be Christianity, we have to follow God's work. God's work is, you know, supposed to be a reflective thought through us to give us the ability to change the world around us. So when page 25 was taken out, and I'll read it again, because it literally, once I read page 25, like a light bulb just clicked on in my head, and a lot of things made more sense. I felt more clarity within myself. But that thought model, which perfectly reflects the essence or spirit of the absolute, fits the Christian metaphysical description of the Holy Spirit. Finally, a description of the universal hologram, the torus of creation, the evolution, is neither new nor original. Its use is as a figure of the universe of creation developing in evolution is found in various representations in virtually every religious system of antiquity. So there is one source. Absolute as the model around which the evolution of time-space revolves to ultimately attain a reflection of and union with him. Yeah, it's pretty deep, and this is coming from a declassified CIA document. So to break down this last section again, and like, I expect people to watch this video. I mean, I touched base on, you know, my religious backgrounds and how I was, you know, spiritually motivated. You know, I had like a spiritual awakening a couple months back where I became closer to God and did all this research. Just even stumbling upon this through my research, this completely changed, like, everything. Let me drink some water real quick, hold on. So, I don't know, you know, even as a viewer watching this video, I don't know your spiritual background, if you have any spiritual background. I'm not here to judge. I don't want you guys passing judgment on me for my spiritual background. I just want to tell you guys, I think this section alone pretty much just connected all the dots to other people that I've talked to, their religious backgrounds, their religious experiences that they've had with God. And like I said, I don't think anybody's wrong. Us as individuals, as spiritual beings, are supposed to reflect God's work, you know, through his actions, you know, Jesus, his actions, to follow our waking moment to change the world. That's why the first video I was talking about, we're, you know, talking about raising frequencies, and I brought the graph up. I don't know if you guys watched the other video, but it brought the graph up of low vibrational the spiritual attunement where we need to be at, and then the higher frequencies. That all ties along with, you know, the higher vibrating at a higher frequency. Let me look it up. Excuse me. Hopefully it's not too big. So I brought this up in my first video. Hopefully it comes up. Let me see if I can pull it up. So we all vibrate at different frequencies all the time, right? The lower frequencies are the worst moods that you can have to deal with. The higher frequencies are centered peace, joy, love, reason, all the way up to enlightenment. 700 plus. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's what everybody wants to try to attain later on in life through practice. But this section, I mean, profound to me to be able to say that, you know, if the CIA in 1983 wrote this paper explaining how everything's tied together, page 25 was completely erased and not even released, was because I think of the section where they talk about our conscious is supposed to be reflective of the absolute. It's supposed to be a reflection of God. That's how we attain our spiritual enlightenment. That's how we move through the world to change the world. To talk about, you know, my girlfriend, about doing grid work. You know, we're supposed to be here on this planet. Our contract, you know, if you're spiritually awoken and you start to be hypersensitive to more things, you think about what our job is on this planet. We're supposed to follow God, image of God. So for this paper to tell me, that's the last section that was deleted, that mystics the world over, it seems, have perceived the universal hologram in the same spiral form and have incorporated the intuitive knowledge in their religious writings from antiquity to the present. This was all established centuries ago. And I don't know, now with like modern day and technology and, you know, a lot of, I talked about my last video, everything's changing. A lot of things are changing. I hope like my message gets out there to people, that you all, like my job I feel like is to just try to educate more people to open up their eyes to stuff. And yeah, self-knowledge. Is it axiomatic to the mystic philosophers of the old that the first step in personal maturity could be expressed in the aphorism, know thyself? To them, the education of a man undertook as its primary step achievement as an introverted focus so that he learned what was within himself before attempting to approach the outside world. They rightly assumed that he could not effectively evaluate and cope with the world until he fully understood his personal psychological balance. So I feel like a lot of people, especially now, they go to teachers or they, you know, practice esoteric different forms of religion for, you know, yoga, meditation, to try to find answers. But in my opinion, I feel like that's the first couple of steps where people want an answer. They seek, like the spiritual enlightenment, I think they said that's one part is the seeker. You become the seeker. You start to strive to have more understanding of knowledge. You start to answer questions, deeper meaning, philosophical meaning than just the ordinary questions you go throughout. And I think within that journey, you go within yourself, you start to find yourself, you start to empower yourself, and then more vast of knowledge, you know, gets unlocked the more you know, you start to research. The insights being provided by the 12th century psychology in this context through the use of various kinds of personality testing seems to be revalidation of the ancient intuition, but no personality tests But no personality test, or it seems of test, will ever replace the depth and fullness of the perception of self which can be achieved when the mind alters its state of consciousness sufficiently to perceive the very hologram of itself which has been projected into the universe in its proper context as part of the universal hologram in a totally holistic and intuitional way. This would seem to be one of the real promise of the gateway experiences from the standpoint of its ability to provide a portal through which, based on months if not years of practice, the individual may pass in his search to find himself personally, effectually, and truth in a larger sense. So they conducted this military experiment to try to expedite spiritual awareness and consciousness faster than taking, years or traveling to different countries, studying other forms of religions. They were trying to expedite this and have consciousness within the person to be activated faster and use it as a tool. Page 25 was I think the icing on the cake for this whole declassified document. And like I said, I don't know your religious backgrounds. I'm not here to debate religion. I just want to try and open people's eyes up to stuff that I think a lot of people don't think about or don't think deeply enough about. Because even if you're skimming the surface on all this stuff about spirituality and getting closer to God, and going to church, reading the books, following your life's work and mission to reflect God within your actions and throughout your daily life, this first part that was cut out of the declassified document just was mind-blowing. Yeah. Last part, they just have a breakdown of, yes, they had the participants succeed in what they projected for the outcome, and after that it was shelved. I think the CIA didn't touch anything about this because I think at that time in 1983 there's a lot of other stuff happening in the world. They didn't deem it worthy enough to be further investigated for military exercises or purpose, but they did quote Itzhak Bentov on Stalking the Wild Pendulum. That was the book that he wrote in 1977, which the diagrams I think for this paperwork comes from his work. So food for thought. That was one of the rabbit holes. Yeah, hopefully I was able to try to open your guys' perception on reality a little bit. And I hope that, the more videos I start posting, I'm going to separate things. So one's going to be rabbit holes where I'll do research on something, or I'll stumble upon something that I'll see, on the algorithm, and then I'll post it here. And maybe if you guys want to leave comments and stuff, we can talk about that. I'm going to try to get the Discord stuff set up so I can have like a forum community. So like if anybody else is interested to talk, I'm down to talk. This all this stuff is mind-blowing. The other videos I'll be posting for educational purposes of like books that I read, references and stuff that I would want to like direct you guys to if you are going along your spiritual, journey and practice. But I love you guys and thank you, and like, subscribe, all that stuff. The whatever they say on YouTube. But thank you guys for listening.